Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons. Glad that you're with me today, whether you're watching of an evening or a morning or afternoon, on your way to work, whenever it is you're watching. I just want to thank you for tuning in this morning or tonight or whenever it is that you're watching. As you can tell, I'm out on the bike again today. It's a little chilly out. I've got my heated jacket on, but I just couldn't resist. You know, today have intermittent clouds and sunshine. When the sun's out, it's pretty nice, but boy, when the clouds are not, when the clouds cover the sun, it gets a little chilly. So today I wanted to talk about something that may be a little bit different. I think all of us would agree that to whatever degree that you and I are flawed, okay? You and I are flawed. You know, I've talked about making mistakes, and I've talked about having peace and not worrying, the last two podcasts that I did. But this whole thing about redemption, redemption from being flawed to forgiven, that's what I want to talk about today. Redemption from being flawed to forgiven. We're all flawed, every one of us, but we don't have to live with under the oppression, if you will, of being flawed. No one is perfect. There was only one perfect person that walked the earth, and that was Jesus. So all of us are flawed. Okay? The Bible teaches, for all have sinned to come short of the glory of God. There is none righteous, no, not one. Okay? So we need to accept the fact that we're all flawed. Now what? Do we just live with that? Do we just say, well, you know, I'm flawed and that's why I did what I did. Sorry. No. We can live beyond that. And I want to give you today 3 examples of individuals in the Bible. Now, you know, there's probably 3 times that from the Old and New Testament both. But I want to just choose 3 for today to talk about. And I may, you know, at some other point, later point, I may, you know, come back and talk about this again and give you some other examples. The first example I want to give of a person that was flawed and then forgiven was David. David went from adultery to redemption. Now you remember in the story of David and Bathsheba. It's a well-known story, and you know, David slept with another man's wife. She had a baby from that. He ended up killing her husband, or having him killed. And so, you know, so there, not only was there adultery, but there was a murder plot to kill her husband. You know, kind of sounds like some of the stories today, right? But the Bible says, now this is key now, the Bible says that David was a man after God's own heart. Well, now how can that be? David was a man after God's own heart. So David was king in Israel. He was king during the time that that he committed this adultery. Okay? So how did he go from that to being redeemed? Well, the side story to all of that is that God, you know, I've shared before, God's always working behind the scenes. God had something in mind for David, right? It was through David, the lineage of David, that Jesus would be born. So there was a plan already in place. You know, the plans that God puts in place, you know, they're going to be realized. Okay, so God is preparing the prophet called Nathan, and God had revealed to Nathan all that had gone on. And so Nathan asks for an audience with the king after he had committed this adultery. Nathan confronts him and he tells him a story. about two shepherds, and one shepherd stealing the lamb of another shepherd. And he asked David, King, what do you think ought to be done with the man who stole the lamb? And David says, bring him here. I will demand his life from him. How dare he do that? Nathan points his finger at David and said, you are that man. You are that man. You have done that, David. And he confronts him about the adultery. The Bible teaches that what is done in secret will be brought to light. That's an important thing to think about. Kind of a sobering thought to think about. So, out of that confrontation, David wrote the Psalm 51. And I want you to go read that. I'm not going to quote that now. It's rather lengthy. But parts of it, he says, against you and you only have I sinned and done this evil. He's talking about, what David had revealed that God knew about, right? The sin with Bathsheba. Against you and you only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight. Do not cast me away. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Take not your salvation from me, okay? So he brought him to a sense of redemption. Now, did David pay for that? Absolutely, he paid for that. But God redeemed him and used him mightily, because it was from David that Solomon was born, right? And Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs. He was king over Israel. He did a lot of wonderful things. He ended, toward the end of his life, he, went off the rails, but he did some wonderful things. So David is proof positive that a man that is flawed, God can redeem him. Now, if you need to notice, there was confrontation there, and there was not. He was trying to hide it. He had Uriah, who was Bathsheba's husband. He had him killed. He tried to cover it up, but you cannot cover up what God sees in the open. Okay. So David is an example of a flawed person who received the redemption of God, Psalm 51. And then secondly, there's Peter. Peter is an example of denial and faith renewed. Denial and faith renewed. Well-known story of Peter. Jesus was arrested and went on trial. Peter was identified as one of the disciples who followed him. And when he was confronted, Peter said, "No, I don't know the guy. I'm not one of his followers." And he denied him 3 times. He went and hid in shame. Okay? Later on in the Gospels, we read that the resurrected Jesus is there on the shores of Galilee. And once again, Peter is confronted by the risen Lord. And he asked him 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Feed my sheep." "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Feed my lambs." And then it says in the Bible, it says 3 times, the 3rd time that Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" It says that Peter was grieved. Why was Peter grieved? Because he remembered the time that he denied him just days earlier 3 times. And Peter became a pillar, a primary leader in the church. Okay? When you read the book of Acts and Peter's epistles, he was a leader. He became one of the primary leaders and missionaries in the church. So Peter is an example of denial, but faith that was renewed. Okay? And then finally today I want to look at the prodigal son. Prodigal son is an example of hitting rock bottom and finding grace. Hitting rock bottom and finding grace. So the story of the prodigal son, the prodigal son demanded his inheritance. The Bible says that the father gave him the inheritance, and that the son went and squandered it. in what the Bible calls riotous living. You know, he had wine, women, and song. He partied. He blew the whole inheritance. And the Bible says that he came to a point where he was eating the husks that the pigs would eat. Okay? So he had gone from having all of this inheritance, all of these, quote, friends, to, you know, eating out of a pig pen. The Bible says that he came to himself, which means it dawned on him, duh, I'll go home and I'll ask to become one of my father's servants, and surely he will take me in. So the Bible says he goes home, starts going home. The father is watching for him to come home, longing for him to come home, sees him off in the distance. The father goes and runs to him and said, this my son who was lost is now found. We'll kill the fatted lamb, and we'll have a party. We'll celebrate. My son came home. I want you to think about that. He hit rock bottom, but then he found grace in his Father's eyes. Sometimes God allows you and I to hit rock bottom before he will step in. He doesn't rescue us from situations. He rescues us through situations. And sometimes we might feel like we've hit bottom, but it's not rock bottom. Think of this son. He was heir to the father's inheritance. He could have had it all, but he got in a hurry. He went and blew the inheritance on having a party, constant party, and then whenever the money was gone, the friends were gone. But God was not. God was watching, and God saw it through. And this is an example, a wonderful example of how the Father redeems you and I as the prodigal. You and I are like the prodigal son, right? We want to go live our life. We want to party. We want to have fun. We want to do our own thing. We want to be independent. We don't want to be responsible or accountable to anybody. We're going to do our thing. And then whenever that's all gone and we hit rock bottom and we look around and the people that said they were our friends are not our friends at all, and we're left all alone, then what? Then what? I often ask the question, when you come to the end of yourself, what do you have? When you come to the end of yourself, what do you have? We have the redemption of the Father. And so I want you to think about that in this new month of the new year. Think about the fact that you and I are flawed, that we mess up, that we foul up, that sometimes we do it without knowing it, sometimes we intentionally do it. But either way, God is there to redeem us from the mess that we make. I love that about God. He is a wonderful, loving, gracious, merciful Father. So I want you to think about that. David and his adultery, yet God was there to redeem him. Peter and his denial, God was there to redeem him, and the faith was renewed, and he became strong. And then the prodigal son is, even when you and I go wayward, even though when you and I go do our own thing and rebel against what God desires, he's there watching, waiting, longing, yearning for us to come home. So what do we need to do? We need to acknowledge our mistakes. We need to seek forgiveness. We need to learn and grow and embrace God's wonderful grace. Okay? Think about that over this next week and this next month, even this next year. God bless you. Thanks you for riding along with me today. Another beautiful day to ride. Thanks for tuning in again whenever it is that you tune in. And we'll be back next week, either in the back on the motorcycle or once again in the studio. Either way, we're going to bring another life lesson to you. God bless you. Have a good day. Have a good week. Have a good rest of your month.